Lower life forms. A Dragon Ball Z Canon Divergence Fic. The crater was still smoking when Piccolo walked into it. Two bodies lay in the churned dirt. And for one long moment, the boy standing at the crater's lip could not make himself believe that only one of them was breathing. His father was on his back with his eyes half open, looking at nothing, at everything, at the sky. There was a hole through him you could have put a fist through, cauterized black at the edges, and no amount of staring at it made it close. 6 feet away, face down in his own blood, lay the man who had put it there. Raditz was breathing, barely. A thin, catching rasp of air dragged in and out of a chest that had taken the same twin-fingered blast, absorbed the worst of it before it ever reached Goku behind him. And by some ugly combination of Saiyan hide and Saiyan spite had not yet finished the job of killing him. Krillin found his voice first. Piccolo. He's still, I can see that. Piccolo crouched over the wreck of a man and pressed 2 fingers to his throat, not gently. The pulse under his fingers was ragged and weak and undeniably there. He thought about ending it. He thought about it for exactly as long as it took to remember that this creature was the only living thing on the planet who knew how many more of his kind were coming, and when, and how strong they were, and what they wanted, and that a corpse could not be made to tell him any of that. You're not serious, Krillin said. He knows things we need to know. Piccolo straightened, hauled Raditz up by the collar of his ruined armor like a sack of grain. A weapon that talks is more useful than one that doesn't. Gohan hadn't moved. He was staring at his father's face, and the sound coming out of him wasn't quite crying. It was smaller than that, and worse, a kind of airless hitching that didn't seem to know how to become anything else. Piccolo looked at him once, filed the sound away somewhere he wasn't ready to examine, and said nothing. There would be time to be gentle with the boy later. Maybe, if such a thing was in him to begin with. There was no time now. He slung Raditz over one shoulder like cordwood, and left the crater, and after a moment the boy followed, because there was nothing else in the world left for him to follow. Piccolo chose a gorge 300 miles from anything, a raw scar of red rock, and dead trees, where no one would come looking and nothing would overhear. He bound Raditz's wrists behind him with a strip of his own torn cape reinforced by ki, tied off in a knot that would tighten if the Saiyan's power spiked, and he did not bother being careful with a wound in his chest while he did it. Raditz surfaced into consciousness somewhere in the middle of this, and immediately tried to break the boy's neck with his tail before discovering the tail had been pinned separately, wound tight around a jagged spur of rock, and screaming when he strained against it. Good, Piccolo said. You're awake. You? Raditz's voice came out wet and furious. His eyes, when they focused, went first to Piccolo, assessing, and then past him to the boy standing a cautious distance away, and something in his expression curdled even further. You should have let me die. Probably. Piccolo crouched tri-level, unbothered. But you're going to tell me about the ones coming after you instead. Raditz laughed, if you could call it that, a broken, bubbling sound that ended in him coughing blood onto the rocks. There is nothing you weaklings can do that will matter. Vegeta and Nappa will burn this mudball to slag whether I breathe, or not. How long? A year? He spat it out like the number itself disgusted him, in admission of how long he'd have to lie here rotting before rescue came. If it came at all. 1 year. And then you'll wish you'd let this thing. A jerk of his chin toward Gohan finish dying with the rest of you. Gohan flinched at that, small and quick, and looked at the ground. Piccolo noted the flinch too, filed it next to the hitching non-crying sound from the crater, and asked his next question in exactly the same flat voice as the first. He kept at it for an hour. Power levels, numbers, the name of the thing they served, the name of the world they came from, the reason a fighting race would let itself be leased out like mercenaries to something crueler than itself. Raditz answered in pieces, sometimes to boast, sometimes because pain made his tongue looser than his pride would have liked, and Piccolo took all of it and said nothing about how much of it frightened him. Gohan did not go near the prisoner for 2 days. He had a good excuse. Piccolo kept him at the far end of the gorge, running him through forms, until his arms shook, feeding him nothing but the dried mystery meat Piccolo produced from somewhere, and never explained, letting him cry himself to sleep against a boulder each night without comment, which was, from Piccolo, something like tenderness. But the real reason Gohan didn't go near Raditz was simpler than any of that. He was afraid of him. The ordinary animal fear of a small thing near something that had already hurt it once, and being afraid of your own family was a feeling that didn't have anywhere to go. On the 3rd day he went anyway, because Raditz hadn't eaten, and some part of Gohan that his mother had built brick by brick over 4 years could not stand the idea of a person going hungry within reach of food, whatever else that person was. Raditz watched him approach with the flat, wary attention of a chained animal. He'd been propped against the rock face by Piccolo that morning, too weak yet to do much but sit. The wound in his chest wrapped in strips of Piccolo's own cape, and weeping through the cloth. Up close he smelled like blood, an old sweat and something underneath that. Something that made the small hairs on Gohan's arms stand up without him knowing why. An animal recognition, blood answering blood. What? Raditz said. Do you want? Gohan held out the bowl. It was nothing. A dented tin thing with a few strips of the dried meat and a fist-sized chunk of something Piccolo called bread, though it more closely resembled a rock. You should eat something. You're hurt. Raditz stared at the bowl like it might be a trick, then at the boy holding it, and his lip curled. I know what I am, half-breed. I don't need you to observe it for me. I wasn't. Gohan's hands tightened on the bowl. I just thought you thought. Raditz's laugh scraped out of him again. Thinner this time, running out of steam even as he tried to force menace into it. Kakarot's get. Weak, soft mewling. I should have killed you the moment I saw the tail on you and spared myself the disgust of watching you grow into whatever this is. Gohan set the bowl down anyway, just out of reach of the bound hands, close enough that Raditz could get to it if he wanted, and stepped back before he could see whether he would. His eyes were stinging, and he hated that they were. Hated that 4 days after watching his father die he still had it in him to be hurt by a stranger's cruelty, as if there were an infinite well of things about the world that could make him cry, and he was determined to find the bottom of it one insult at a time. He was your brother, Gohan said, very quietly. Not really a question. Something crossed Raditz's face too fast to name. Gone before Gohan could be sure he'd seen it at all. He was an embarrassment, Raditz said. He forgot what he was. You'll do the same, if you live long enough. Which you won't. Gohan walked away without answering. Behind him, after a long moment in which he was sure no one was watching, Raditz ate the bread. The nights were the worst part, and Piccolo, for all his cold arithmetic, had not planned for what to do about them. Gohan cried without meaning to. The way small children cry, in bursts that came and went like weather, and on the 5th night he cried longer than usual and quieter, trying very hard not to be heard, curled up against the same boulder with his tail wrapped around himself like the only comfort available. Piccolo was 30 yards off, meditating, ostensibly asleep, actually listening to every sound in the gorge the way he listened to everything. And he made the deliberate choice to let the boy have this alone. Grief needed room. He knew that much, at least, from somewhere he didn't examine too closely. What he had not accounted for was Raditz. The Saiyan was awake too. Sleep didn't come easy with a hole freshly cauterized through your lung, and from where he was chained he could hear the boy crying with an unobstructed clarity that made something in his chest, some old buried thing that had nothing to do with the wound, twist in a way he did not have a name for, and did not want one. He knew this sound. That was the trouble with it. He had made this sound himself, once, a long time ago, and a long way from here, small and alone in the dark on a world that no longer existed. After he shut that thought down hard enough to hurt. Stop that, he said, into the dark, before he'd decided to say anything at all. The crying cut off, startled. What? That noise. Raditz's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. It accomplishes nothing. He is dead. Crying will not unkill him. Only weakness cries over what it cannot change. There was a long silence. When Gohan spoke again his voice was thick and unsteady, but he'd stopped, mostly, out of what Raditz assumed, hoped, was simple obedience to the nearest available adult, even a hated one, because that was easier to believe than the alternative, which was that the boy had simply needed someone, anyone, even his father's murderer, to acknowledge that he was there. Did you ever cry? Gohan asked. When you were little? No, Raditz said, too fast. Whoa. The silence stretched again, and this time Raditz found he could not make himself break it, though the pressure to fill it, to justify himself further, sat oddly heavy in his chest alongside the wound. He told himself it was the pain keeping him from sleep, not the boy's ragged breathing 30 feet away, slowly evening out into something like rest. By the 8th day Raditz could sit up on his own, and Piccolo's questions had shifted from tactics to something closer to anthropology. What Saiyans were, where they'd come from, what had happened to the homeworld Raditz spoke of only in the clipped, furious tone of a man describing a theft. Gohan had taken to sitting a little closer during these sessions, ostensibly practicing his forms nearby, actually listening, the way children listen to things they've been told are not for them. Your father, Raditz said once, apropos of nothing, in the flat pause between two of Piccolo's questions, looking at Gohan with something that might have been calculation or might have been something else entirely. Did he ever speak of Bardock? Gohan's form stuttered to a stop. Who? No. Raditz's mouth twisted. Of course not. He didn't know enough to forget him. He looked away, out at the dead trees, and for a moment his voice lost its usual edge of contempt and became something almost unbearably tired. Our father. He was a soldier. Strong. Vicious. Not sentimental. Saiyans who survived to breed weren't, as a rule, a beat. He'd have gutted you himself, boy. Tail or no tail. The moment he smelled the human in your blood, considered it a mercy. That's horrible, Gohan said, before he could stop himself. That's survival. Raditz's eyes cut to him, hard. You don't know the first thing about it. You've never had to. This? A jerk of his bound wrists, the wound, the gorge, all of it. This is the softest, safest cage a warrior could ask for, and you still flinch at every word I say to you. Pathetic. Piccolo, who had been silent through this exchange, spoke without looking up from where he sat. Keep going. Tell him about Frieza. Raditz's jaw worked, some private struggle playing out behind his eyes, and then he told them, in a voice gone low and careful, about a tyrant who bought and sold whole races like livestock, and a homeworld that no longer existed because it had stopped being useful. And Gohan sat very still and listened to his uncle describe the destruction of an entire planet with the clinical distance of a man reciting a grocery list, and understood for the first time that the fury in Raditz wasn't only, or even mostly, about him. Krillin found the gorge on the 10th day, following key signatures he half hoped he was wrong about, and the moment he confirmed he wasn't, his face went through several things in quick succession: relief at finding Gohan alive, and then something considerably darker, at finding what was chained 20 feet away from him. You're keeping him alive, Krillin said, not quite a question, standing well back from Raditz with a hand already half raised. This whole time, with Gohan right there, he hasn't hurt the boy. Piccolo didn't look up from where he sat. He murdered Goku, and in a year his friends are going to try to murder the rest of us. And this, Piccolo jerked his chin at Raditz, who was watching the exchange with the lazy, contemptuous attention of a predator too weak to move but not too weak to enjoy a show is the only reason we know that, or how long we have, or what we're up against. Kill him if you want, then explain to everyone what we do with a year of silence, instead of a year of warning. Krillin didn't kill him. He also didn't stay long, unloading a sack of supplies with the wary speed of a man handling something that might go off, and before he left he crouched down next to Gohan, who'd come to help carry the food, and asked him quietly, out of Raditz's hearing or so he thought, if he was okay, really okay, not just saying so. I'm okay, Gohan said, and it wasn't quite a lie, though it wasn't quite true either. You don't have to be brave about this, you know. Any of it. Krillin glanced past him, toward the chain shape in the shadow of the rock wall. Especially not about him. Gohan followed his gaze. Raditz was watching them without any pretense of not watching, his expression unreadable at this distance, and Gohan found, a little to his own surprise, that he didn't have a simple answer for what he felt looking back. Not forgiveness. He was 4 years old going on 5. Not stupid. And he understood in some wordless, bone-deep way that forgiveness wasn't a thing that had been asked of him or was his to give. Not the clean, uncomplicated hatred Krillin seemed to be waiting for him to admit to either. Something messier than both, still without a name, that he didn't try to explain because he didn't think Krillin, kind as he was, had room in his face right now for an answer that complicated. I'll be okay, Gohan said instead, which was the truest thing he had. Krillin left before dark, uneasy, the whole time about the arrangement and saying so twice more before he did, and Raditz waited until his key signature had shrunk to nothing on the horizon before he spoke. Your little friend, he said, is afraid of me? He's afraid for me, Gohan said. It's different? Raditz made a sound that might have been a laugh, might have been something with less humor in it. Is it? He said, and didn't explain what he meant by that, and Gohan, wisely or not, didn't ask. The incident happened on the 11th day. Piccolo had taken to running Gohan through combat drills against the gorge's resident wildlife. Something enormous and reptilian with a taste for small mammals had made its den in the rocks above, and Piccolo's chosen method of training was to point Gohan at it and see what happened. What happened on the 11th day was that the thing got its jaws around Gohan's leg and began, with great enthusiasm, to try to drag him toward its den. Gohan screamed. Piccolo was already moving, 20 yards off, and closing. Not fast enough. Roll into it. Don't pull away. The words tore out of Raditz before he decided to say them. Pure animal reflex, the bark of a warrior watching bad technique get a body killed. Your weight's wrong, boy. You'll dislocate the whole leg fighting the bite. Roll with it and go for the eyes. It can't hold if it can't see. Gohan, sobbing and terrified, somehow heard it through the panic, and rolled with the drag instead of against it, and drove 2 small fingers into the reptile's eye hard enough that it shrieked, and let go. Piccolo finished it a half-second later, with a key blast, that turned the den's newest tenant into a smear on the rock. Silence settled over the gorge. Gohan sat in the dirt, clutching a bleeding, but intact leg, staring across the distance at the man chained to the rock face, who was staring back at him with an expression caught somewhere between fury and something that looked, for just a moment, almost like surprise at his own throat. Don't, Raditz snarled before anyone could say anything at all. Look at me like that. I didn't do it for you. Then why? Because a Saiyan bleeding out from bad form is an insult to the blood, whatever's diluting it in your case. His lip curled, but there was something brittle underneath it now, something working too hard to sound as certain as it wanted to. Vegeta's men would laugh themselves sick watching you die that stupidly. I have some pride left, even chained to a rock by weaklings. That's all this was. Gohan looked at him for a long moment, not afraid, not quite. Something else Raditz didn't have a word for, and didn't want to look at directly. And then, unbelievably, he smiled, small and crooked and entirely unbothered by the excuse. Okay, he said, thank you anyway. Raditz turned his face away, and said nothing else for the rest of the day, and if Piccolo noticed how carefully he avoided looking at the boy for the remainder of the afternoon, he said nothing about that either. The gorge settled, over the following week, into something that was not peace, but had the shape of a routine, which for people freshly and permanently altered by grief was sometimes the closest available thing. Piccolo trained Gohan into the ground each day, and interrogated Raditz each evening, and between the two activities a strange, unacknowledged third thing had begun happening, that none of the 3 of them would have named if you'd held a blade to their throats. Gohan still brought the food. Raditz still insulted him for it, though the insults had thinned, somehow, worn down at the edges like a stone in a river, less half-breed filth now, and more a kind of reflexive, almost bored contempt that didn't require him to mean it quite so much. He still called Goku weak and Gohan weaker. He still spoke of Vegeta's arrival like a promised reckoning, a year away, and coming regardless of anything that happened in this gorge. He had not once said anything that could be mistaken, by any reasonable observer, for kindness. And yet, on the 15th night, Gohan came to sit near him without a bowl in his hands, without an excuse at all. Just to sit, the way children sit near a fire whether or not the fire has any warmth left to give. Raditz did not tell him to leave. He watched the boy settle into the dirt a few feet away, watched him look up at the 2 moons. No, 1 moon. He corrected himself. This pathetic mudball only had the one, though something about the boy's face in the low light for one disorienting second put him in mind of another face entirely, small and dark-eyed, and long dead on a planet that no longer existed. And something moved in his chest that had nothing to do with the wound Piccolo still hadn't let heal properly. You should go to sleep, Raditz said finally, gruff, because it was easier than the silence. I know. Gohan didn't move. Can I ask you something? No. What was he like? Bardock. Before Gohan gestured vaguely, encompassing planets, tyrants, all of it. Raditz was quiet long enough that Gohan thought he wouldn't answer at all. When he did, his voice had gone strange. Not soft, Raditz didn't have soft in him, or told himself he didn't, but quieter, aimed somewhere past the boy and into the dark. Loud, he said, scarred. Didn't smile much, and when he did it meant something was about to die. A pause. He'd have called you an abomination, and meant it as a compliment to your nerve for surviving this long anyway. That was the closest thing to gentle in him. That doesn't sound very gentle. No, Raditz agreed. It wasn't. He looked at the boy then, really looked, at the small stubborn set of his jaw so unlike his father's easy grin and so unlike, and yet somehow not unlike, the grim line of a face Raditz had not let himself remember clearly in years. You have his stubbornness, at least, wasted on a face like his instead of mine, but there. It's there. Gohan didn't know what to do with that, so he did nothing with it at all. Didn't smile, didn't thank him, didn't push for more, just sat with it in the quiet the way you sit with something fragile you're afraid of breaking by looking at it too directly. After a while his breathing evened into sleep, right there in the dirt 3 feet from the man who'd killed his father, and Raditz sat very still, and did not wake him, and told himself, with the particular ferocity of someone lying to no one but himself, that it was only because the boy needed rest for tomorrow's training, and nothing else. And certainly nothing that a Saiyan bred for war would ever be foolish enough to call by its name. Above them, the single moon rose higher over the dead trees, and somewhere 300 miles away and 350 days out, the machinery of an ending neither of them could stop was already turning toward the gorge, but that night, at least, neither of them said anything more, and neither of them moved away,